Hello everyone, are you ready for a session today? Today's session is going to be on women poets used in classical dance post-Indian independence. So, how many of you are fond of poetry? How many of you read poetry? How many of you specifically read women poetry? That is poetry written by women. Of course, you also have poetry written on women, but today we are going to concentrate on poetry written by women and how it has got integrated into the repertoire of Indian classical dances, particularly since the post-independence period. Let us begin by having a little idea of the history of women writing poetry in India. You do understand why poetry is important. Now, the power of poetry makes it a real force to reckon with. The poet speaks to the reader intimately, almost as if she is speaking to the reader in the ear, and gives you an insight into the working of her mind. If done well, it can illuminate parts of life to which you as a reader may never have connected before. With its brevity and with the power of a pointed arrow that is a flame, it affects you. It compels you to contemplate, compels you to consider what they are saying, and sometimes even succeeds in changing your ideas. India has a very strong tradition of poetry from ancient times. There have been male and female poets. In fact, even a few Vedic hymns are ascribed to women, but no definitive record of women's literary prowess exists predating the 6th century BC. The emergence of the first body of work, of poetic work by women, is attributed to the advent of Buddhism. Perhaps it was the freedom offered by the religion, the way of life it offered to women, and the principle of equality that it propagated, which allowed women to pen their thoughts for the first time. By offering the institution of the Sangha, Buddhism offered women the opportunity to break away from the restrictions of a domestic life. This was a major factor in the rise of Indian women's literature in the early 6th century onwards. The earliest known anthology of women's literature has been identified as poems belonging to the Therigata nuns. The poets were contemporaries of Buddha. One of these poems, Mutta, writes, "So free am I, so gloriously free, free from 3 petty things, from mortar, from pestle, and from my twisted lord." You see, religious escapism was the only way out for many women who were frustrated with a life shackled to the house. They chose to break away from the social world of tradition and marriage. Because of that freedom, there emerged poems and songs about what it meant to be free. Till then, it was not known. This freedom from chores and sexual slavery was not known. So this writing is very important because it reflects the politics of self-forming. The next efflorescence of women's voice in poetry came in the medieval period as a result of the Bhakti movement. Among significant women voices is that of Andal, the only female Alvar saint. Between the 5th and the 8th centuries, the 12 Alvar saints revitalized Vaishnavism in Tamil-speaking regions of southern India. Like Kabir, Andal was discovered under a tulsi plant and named Godai, or the gift of Mother Earth. She is credited with great Tamil works, the Tirupavai and the Nachiyar Tirumodi, which are still recited by devotees during the winter season of Maragari. Andal's fantasies, as she performed the Margali rituals, expressed lucidly in 30 hymns, is the topic of Tirupavai. Apart from Tirupavai, she composed the 143 hymns in the Nachiyar Tirumoli. Conservative Vaishnavite institutions do not encourage the propagation of Nachiyar Tirumoli as much as they encourage the Tirupavai, because the second belongs to an erotic genre of spirituality that is similar to Jayadev's Geet Govind. In it, she expresses her intense love in varying moods of bridal love, filled with tender hope, of utter dejection, of joyful triumph, of woeful sorrow and total surrender, all emotions that lend themselves very well to dance. It is no exaggeration to say that Andal is the most frequently danced woman poet in the Bharatanatyam repertoire. She is danced solo by Anita Ratnam in the Andal Kautavam, by Malavika Sarukai in Darshan Seeing, which explores the passion of Andal for Krishna. While Andal was danced regularly, some of the other Bhakti female poets were not so popular. Forget popular, some were not even known. For instance, Akka Mahadevi is not the stuff of tradition or traditional repertoires. If Andal was devoted to Krishna, Akka Mahadevi, one of the early female poets in the Kannada language, was also a prominent figure in the Veera Shaivaya Bhakti movement of the 12th century, which was devoted to Shiva. She is known to have considered Shiva, whom she called Chenna Mallikarjuna, as her husband, in tradition that is understood as Madhurya Bhakti Bhava. Her 430 vachanas, a form of spontaneous mystical poems, are considered amongst her most notable contribution to Kannada literature. She composed relatively fewer poems than some of the other saints of the movement, yet her contribution to the spiritual poetry of India is considerable. She is an inspirational presence in the pantheon of Kannada literatures and in the history of Karnataka. And so her absence in dance can be questioned. Actually, Akka Mahadevi realized that the Brahmins, Buddhists and Jains saw women as impure and inferior beings who could not follow the high path towards salvation. She chose to strip herself naked, much like the mothers of Manipur who stripped themselves naked to protest against brutalities performed on them and their children. Akka's nakedness and her whole life embodies a total rejection of the very idea of women's impurity. She is the most radical female martyr in the Indian poetic tradition. She finds reference in the dance drama Akka Mahadevi, Her Search for Shiva's Love, which was created by Chennai-based Bharatanatyam dancer Sarangarajan Vijayalakshmi and supported by the Swedish Institute and Christian Stad University College. It had its premiere in Bangalore on 27 July 2003 with representatives from the Karnataka state government and the Akka Mahadevi Samiti organization. It was subsequently performed in Sweden. In the year 2011, dancer Anita Ratnam curated and convened a 3-day festival and seminar which she titled very provocatively, or should we say unusually, as Mad and Divine, to capture the voices of female poets of India from the medieval period. This is the second time that you have the voices of women becoming very powerful again. The title of the seminar appears to be intriguing, but not if you contextualize it in a patriarchal society that brands men seeking the Lord as realized beings, while women seeking the divine are called mad. The further question that should arise in contemporary times and in our minds should be whether madness was restricted to that period in history, or can we term those women who break out of the norms to defy the established models and pursue their dreams of larger societal goals, often at great cost to themselves personally and emotionally? Are they not mad? Should we not call them mad too? In the medieval period, one of the strongest image is that of Andal. Andal was writing body-centric verses, while others like Akka Mahadevi and 6th century poet Karaikal Ammayar, who was one of the 3 women amongst the 63 Nayanmars and one of the greatest figures of early Tamil literature, who used their bodies as sites of resistance. Many of these medieval poets accepted no other man but the Lord, the object of their desire, with Andal going to the extent of writing, "My voluptuous breasts swell with desire for my Lord alone. If there is even talk of offering my body to mortal men, then I cannot live." So on one hand you have Andal saying that. On another you have Mirabai, who runs away from her earthly husband, the Rana, to be with the Lord. Look at the substance these women are made of. Aikya, in the voice of Akka Mahadevi, danced by Maithili Prakash, is an example of focused work on her. Nartaki Nataraj offered choice selections from the treasure trove of Tamil literature, the works of the Avvaiyars, or women poets. Avvaiyars was the title of more than one poet who was active during the different periods of Tamil literature, including the Sangam and Chola periods. The sublime poetry covers a stupendous range of the different aspects of life, from detachment to passionate outbursts. Nartaki chose poems involving yogic beliefs, life values, as well as the woman poet's wait for the beloved. An intriguing part of the choreography that was attempted was the portrayal of different age groups and personalities for the women composers. At that festival, Bangalore-based Madhu Nataraj delved into the poetry of 3 lesser-known women mystics, Lingamma, Muktayakka and Molige Mahadevi, 12th century mystic poets who philosophized the monistic Shaivism. Clad in a simple light-colored costume, Madhu used audiovisuals, music and dance. Interestingly, Madhu connected her present, surrounded by a cacophony of noises and crowds, with visuals which merged into her, out of which she emerged to seek the sacred energies of the triad in an effort to recreate the outer and inner spaces. The audiovisual also used Ramya Reddy's photo art to give a layered presentation to Madhu's seamless Kathak swirls and stances, allowing her to dissolve in divinity. Madhu not only wove into Indian dance's repertoire these rarely heard voices, but she also presented it in a modernistic manner, as if to suggest that what they had to say was still relevant today. In the case of Aditi Mangaldas, who performed Meera, the traditional image of Meera holding onto a statue of Girdhar, Ek Tara in hand, was very much a part of the repertoire of Kathak. In this choreography, which is part of a larger work called Uncharted Seas, Aditi saw Mirabai as a free-spirited person living her life with abandon. Aditi went beyond interpretation, which is via mudras, to movement abhinay, in recognition of the fact that while Meera needed Krishna's image externally, internally she did not need any fixed points. Apart from the dance interpretations of the writings of this lineup of women bhakti poets that the Mad and Divine Festival afforded, there was the next year a festival which also had a lineup of medieval bhakti poets. This was called Talking to God in the Mother Tongue. It was organized by Manushi in Delhi in 2012. A range of dancers danced the pieces of poetry in many languages. Rani Khanum performed to the works of the 14th century mystic poet Lalder or Laleshwari from Kashmir, claimed as a Sufi saint by Muslims and as a Shiva Bhakt by Hindus. Like Akka Mahadevi, Lalder too had divested herself of her clothes. Seasoned and senior Bharatanatyam dancer Lakshmi Vishwanath took on the challenge of depicting the poetry of Karaikal Ammayar, whose description of the awesome dancing of Shiva is what was contained in the poem. Lakshmi also danced on an excerpt of a Muddupalani composition from Radhika Santwanam, the exotic sensuality of the verses comparable with Jayadev's Geet Govind. For dance to achieve such intense emotions, clarity of Abhinay must be accompanied with matching and emotionally rich and experienced musical accompaniment. Jhelam Paranjpe's Odissi, interpreting the Abhangs of Janabai, benefited from the advantage of music composed by Kishori Amonkar, while enjoying a regional flavor. Janabai is revered in Maharashtra along with the male sons Dhyaneshwar, Namdev, Tukkaram and Eknath. Poetry served as an important non-violent instrument of nationalism during the Indian freedom movement. As the freedom movement witnessed the blurring of domestic and political spaces, efforts were made for the social upliftment of women. At the forefront of this movement were Jyotiba and Savitri Phule. Jhelam Paranjpe created a dance theatre production called Savitri Vadate or Savitri Speaks, which showcased the importance of women's literacy and the upliftment of the Dalits, based on the 3 key letters that Savitri had written to her husband, along with some poetry that she had written in the 19th century. Jyotiba Phule educated his wife at a time when education for women was a taboo in Maharashtra. Savitribai became the first woman teacher of India when she opened her school. Neither gender nor caste disadvantage was allowed to keep her down, and she walked in step with her husband, far ahead of her times, lighting the lamp for other women to follow. This dance theatre presentation by Suhita Thate, Jhelam Paranjpe and the dancers of Smitalaya employed Odissi for the dance segments and interspersed it with some theatrical passages. In modern times too, certain performances using modern poetry stand out. The first is Aditi Mangaldasa's treatment in Kathak to excerpts from Italian author and journalist Oriana Fallaci's novel Letters to a Child Never Born. It is written as a letter by a young professional woman, presumably Fallaci herself, to the fetus she carries. This best-selling novel that sold 4 million copies worldwide details the woman's struggle to choose between a career she loves and an unexpected pregnancy. The work, as presented by Aditi, is an amalgam of traditional training and contemporary thought and reflects Aditi's open-minded approach. Another multi-artist work that employs poetry by women is Nirguna, pure spirit without attributes of form, which was created in 1999 by Bharatanatyam dancer and scholar Parul Shah at the MS University, Vadodara, under the campus's diversity project. It was supported by the Ford Foundation. It used the writings of 8 women poets of the 20th century, writing on diverse themes, from the 16th century medieval Gujarati poet Ganga Sati and her daughter-in-law Panabai to 20th century iconic poet Amrita Pritam, and younger contemporary poets Nita Ramaiah, Panna Naik, Indira Sant and others. It took a multilingual spectrum of verses on widely varied themes. Using a combination of recitation, traditional music and specially composed tunes, the track was created for 8 dancers that comprised Bharatanatyam, Kathak, folk dance and modern dance separately and infused together in a harmonic whole. Whether written in the 12th or 13th century or in the 20th or 21st century, female voices continue to further the base of Indian philosophy and aesthetics, boldly, with intelligence, forthrightness, and with a pragmatic sensibility. This multidisciplinary dance theatre project integrated multiple streams of movement to voice the women's thought, concerns, struggles, and strengths. The work brought out the voices of contemporary sensibility of women across cultures. In 2008, choreographic collaboration came from Professor Jin Wen Yu, then Chair of Dance Program of University of Wisconsin-Madison, during a 40-day residency. The production had special inputs from Professor Sondra Frale, then Chair of Dance at the State University of New York at Brockport, who was inspired by the creation of Nirguna and narrated the poetry, reciting it as part of the musical score. It was performed by dancers pursuing the postgraduate course in modern dance at University of Wisconsin in Madison. In 2009, Professor Janet Lilly, Chair, Dance, University of North Carolina, USA, got associated with Nirguna, and it was performed in Baroda. This unique sisterhood project, conceived and designed by Professor Parul Shah, paid tribute to a woman's battle against persecution and her determination to dare to live the life she imagines. It is brought forth with sensuous imagery, soulful and intense music, and evocative rhythms. Pakistan-born British poet, artist and documentary filmmaker Imtiaz Dharkar divided her time between London, Wales and Mumbai till her demise in 2011. Her 1997 book of poems titled Postcards from God was converted into a multimedia dance production by the Daksha Seth Dance Company, led by dancer Daksha Seth. Imtiaz's writings emerged from the no man's land, where themes like home, freedom, journeys, geographical and cultural displacement, communal conflict and gender politics intersect. She stands for women's empowerment at all times, castigating forces and symbols that shackle her. As a series of poems in her work, Parda specifically refer to the various aspects of a Muslim woman's life where she experiences injustice, oppression and violence engineered through the culture of Parda. This makes for a contemporary voice that is compelling. When Daksha created the work based on Postcards from God, she went beyond dance and presented a musical that wove in elements of other forms, involving collaborations with other artists from the disciplines of music, theatre, film and literary arts apart from dance. Postcard from God deals with the theme of life in jhuggis, with the jhuggi here being a symbol of our own lives, not quite whole, but a collage of bits and pieces, some cast off, some saved, some left over, all stitched together roughly into a patchwork quilt that makes up our lives, very much like a jhuggi is constructed. It suggests that despite its fragility, life is a miracle, rich with love, hope, and fleeting moments of joy and laughter. An international team of musicians came together to weave in the many divergent elements. Now, this is a wondrous example I've given you. But the question you might ask is, how do such collaborations happen? It is evident that they require much planning and investment of time, which is always at a premium with performing artists, and it is sometimes very, very difficult to synchronize shared and common time given different performance schedules and travel schedules. Well, often such work emerges by happenstance. All of a sudden, without any explanation, at a biannual conference organized around the promotion of Marathi language in the United States of America, in the city of Seattle in Washington in the year 2007, dancer Jailam Paranjpe, singer Ashwini Bhide and poet Vijay Rajadhaksha were invited. Circumstances compelled the three of them to spontaneously get together and create a joint presentation. They put together their talents and came out with Stree Rang, a creative piece based entirely on items about women. All three were on stage at the same time. Each performed singly and in duet format. For instance, Jailam and Ashwini performed 3 songs together: Vande Mataram, a Meera Bhajan and the Devi Stuti. I told you that they were songs about women. It's not that the writers and poets were women, but the songs were keeping the feminine principle in mind. Stree Rang, the production, concluded with all 3 doing a poem together. There was nothing planned about it. It just happened. Sometimes unusual work gets born out of a collaboration driven by a shared commitment to a subject. Now, this was true about a recent work presented by Bharatnatyam and Kuchipudi dancer Ananda Shankar Jayant. A strong woman herself, Ananda joined hands with a lady police officer from her city of Hyderabad. This lady, Tejdeep Kaur Menon, the police officer, is also a published poet. Together they came about to create a piece that is called What About Me? What About Me is a production that focuses sharply on the issue of gender justice. Ananda pushed the traditional movements performed by her group to address this issue, framed by the hard-hitting poetry of the police officer Tejdeep Menon, who, remember, in the course of her harsh conditions of her work, must have seen hundreds of such examples of gender injustice. Both these strong women made the audience sit up and think as the production powerfully used the lines, "Never will I open my palms before a heartless jury, and never will I ask, what about me? Never again will I ask, what about me?" Obviously, they had suggested a path not of the asking, but of the doing. Irrespective of whichever period such women write in, they continue to question certain fixed images, the monolithic images of domesticity, the patriarchal ideas that hold you back, the misogyny that puts you at a lower level. They not only push the envelope for themselves, but for the generations that will follow. They win freedom the hard way, but make it easier for us in this generation and the next generation to walk with greater ease and live a life full of choices. So you see, the power of the poetry of women has to be integrated with dance in contemporary times. Thank you so much for your attention.